Okay, do you have a picture of those beauties?
They are awesome.
Okay, so what I was pointing out is these are sharp and these are dull. The reason you don't want to use the sharp to clean is because it can hurt and damage the sole. So these are way overgrown. And before I start to trim, I'm going to clean out. Does anybody know how often you have to trim? Once a year? Right, it totally depends on the environment. These goats are what, 4 months, and they're way overgrown. They're probably in an environment that's pretty soft. Here at MATC, the first group, in the first 3 weeks, you're going to trim them. You guys will have stuff to trim the next time. They'll grow pretty fast. They're on mats, they're on shavings. But if goats are out with rocks they can climb on and that kind of stuff, some of those only have to be trimmed every 6 months, maybe every 3 months. And then a lot of times farmers and stuff will trim them, and they just trim them standing. In your book, there's some information about trimming goat hooves and things like that. So I would ask that you read that before you start trimming. And the other thing is we'll ask you questions as far as the anatomy. Like, what am I trimming? What's it called? What's this white part right here called? What's this part called? That's the heel. What's the white part at the bottom? The sole. So review your anatomy in the large animal book. It's in there. Because when you're trimming, you say, okay, I'm ready to trim. I'm going to trim for a checkoff. We are going to ask you those questions. Well, what are you trimming? What's the name of that? How far do you want to trim? And I trim to where the lateral wall is just a little bit longer than the sole. Okay, so I want them walking on the hoof walls, not on the sole. Can I trim this too short? What happens if that happens? They bleed. Yeah, it hurts. They bleed. They can get infected. And for me, I would rather you err on the side of leaving it a little longer than causing it to bleed. If you can't see, if there's stool or feces and you can't see where you're cutting, clean it out. Don't cut. And what you're doing is just trying to provide a fairly flat surface for the goat to walk on. Can I trim any part of the hoof or the heel? Yeah, you can trim a little bit. Can I trim too deep on the heel and make them bleed? Yes, you can. Yeah. So when you do one, you're always going to do them together, and you're going to do not just 1 foot, but for the checkoff, you need to do 2 toes, 1 foot. But let's say I was the only person in the group that's going to work on this. Should I trim one and leave the other one the opposite leg looking like that? How come? They'll walk uneven. If they walk uneven, what happens? Yeah, maybe, but just lameness. They'll get lame. So this one here is grown so bad. I can't even see up in there. So I know that there is. This one here almost looks like he's got, it's overgrown bad enough, it almost looks like he's starting to get some deformity up in here. I'm going to take all of this off here.
If you do make them bleed, is there something like small animal to make it stop, or is it just pressure?
There is some septic sticks we have out here, and I'm going to stop digging at this one here. I'm getting a little,
You can use it. Oh,
yes, in answer to your question. Down here, and then I'm going to stop on his tip. Okay, so now I want to